I'm Emily Hamill from Hendrix Power in Avon, Indiana. Welcome to Along Those Lines.
Support for this podcast comes from CTC Global, the nation's preeminent developer of high-performance, high-efficiency bare overhead conductors, used by more than 250 utilities worldwide to improve the efficiency, capacity, reliability, and resilience of their electric power grids.
Hi, everyone. This is a podcast about electric cooperatives, the work they do, and the challenges they face. I'm your host, Scott Hoffman. New government programs and huge sums of grant money are either flowing or about to flow from the $1.2 trillion federal infrastructure law passed in late 2021. More than $100 billion of that money will go to initiatives that electric cooperatives could likely qualify for, including broadband expansions, electric vehicle charging networks, clean energy incentives, and grid resiliency work. This enormous federal commitment offers an unprecedented opportunity for electric cooperatives to add services and improve their systems for their members. But it also presents a challenge for co-ops who are navigating the complicated and time-consuming process of applying for federal grants. Here to talk about the resources, information, and good advice that's available to co-ops are Lauren Khair. She's NRECA's Director of Business Transformation and the association's Project Manager for Infrastructure Funding. Later, we'll talk to Jessica Gray, Chief Financial Officer at Victoria Electric Cooperative in Victoria, Texas, about how they're managing the grant application process. Lauren, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
There have been multiple federal spending packages passed by Congress since the beginning of the pandemic, more than $1 trillion in infrastructure on top of pandemic relief. Do you have a sense right now of how much federal grant money is available in total?
A lot. A lot of money is available. To be honest, no. There's so much money flying around here. I think we can focus on that $1 trillion through the infrastructure bill, the Investment in Jobs Act.
Okay, in order to sort of tee that up, can you give us a sense of sort of the life cycle of one of these giant funding bills, from the writing all the way up to the point where the recipient is writing their final report?
Yes, that's a really great question. So, I will say this just to start off, like we say, every co-op is unique. When you meet one co-op, you've met one co-op. I will say that when you've met one infrastructure program, you've met one infrastructure program. They will all be quite unique. And so the way that we're seeing them operate now, and just obviously with all the caveats that things could change depending on how Department of Energy wants to release it. Normally with a new program, let's just take the GRIP program that just released. The GRIP program is the Grid Resilience and Innovation Partnership Program. It's going to look at both poles and wires as well as smart grids and data topic areas. They put out a request for information to get comments back about how they're thinking about structuring the program for people to apply for funding. Let's get some industry comments about how it really should be structured. NRECA's Government Relations Department looks at whatever is released and decides whether or not we should respond on behalf of our membership. Then the RFI's comment period ends. They'll release the funding opportunity announcement, few months after that RFI closes. The funding opportunity announcement, or FOA, is the vehicle for cooperatives and utilities to apply for federal funding, federal grants. So what happens in that federal funding opportunity announcement? Normally, again, not always, but normally, there is a concept paper stage where, say, a co-op wanted to apply for a microgrid. I always like to use the microgrid as an example. And most programs, not all of them, will require a concept paper anywhere between 3 and 5 pages about what's the topic? What do you want the Department of Energy to fund? Give us your best pitch about why you want us to fund this. DOE will come back. They will encourage certain concept papers to move forward. And that's when the co-op will write what I call that mini research paper to respond to the full funding opportunity announcement with a full application. So it's an RFI period, then the FOA drops or funding opportunity announcement. Then either you need a concept paper or you don't, and they'll be very explicit with you about that. And then you will be required to do a full application for the program. That's the entire life cycle from when something is released to when a co-op needs to respond. Normally, these funding opportunity announcements, this is the kicker, Scott, they're only going to be open for 60 to 90 days. So you have to get your entire topic together, all of your data, all of your good demographics, all of your teaming arrangements, and have a really good proposal done and ready to go out the door within 60 to 90 days.
You put this proposal in and then you wait a long time to find out if you won. Then you win. And then what? What comes then? You get a big deposit in your bank account, or what's the actual dispersal?
That would be great, but no. On the projects that I work on currently, I have a few federal research projects that I currently manage right now. The first thing you're probably going to do is you're going to go into negotiations, right? You're going to say, okay, we've won this award. What's the timeline? What's our period of performance? What is our budget? Who is our subcontractors? Who are our sub-recipients? And so you're going to work with that agency to make sure that you all are in agreement about what you are going to deliver. And that is the time to just make any kind of tweaks to the proposal that you need to do, because the negotiations are going to be involving the lawyers, and they're going to ensure that what you say you're going to do, you're going to do, and that's going to be that contract that you have. That's a really important step. So once you win, it's about execution and about having a good project plan to be able to successfully execute and meet those deliverables which will be required in any project, right? So say you're putting in a microgrid, maybe one of the first deliverables will be you need to complete a feasibility study. Okay, then you turn that into the Department of Energy. If it's deliverable-based contract, they will give you the money for that deliverable. If it's not, it's a different way of setting up a contract. And then you kind of just walk through your project, obviously with interactions with the agency that's funding you to ensure that you're doing what they want you to be doing, and that you're measuring and verifying the goals of the project that you put forward.
Right. And then ultimately, there's some final report that you have to put in saying we did this and here it is and it's functioning and we use the money the way we were supposed to.
You make it sound so simple, Scott, but yes, that is correct. There is a final report at the end of your project period of performance that you got to work with your accounting folks and you got to work with, your technical team to put together to say, this is what we accomplished. Here's our measurement and verification. Also making sure that you have the right systems in place, that you understand how to report to the government appropriately. That is where I think a small barrier is going to be for cooperatives who've never done federal funding, is understanding that they have to track things a little bit differently depending on the agency that they're applying for money from.
With the actual infrastructure bill, roughly a third of it is going to roads and bridges and the kind of stuff that co-ops are probably not going to be bidding on. But the rest of that totality of what's left, how many programs and how much money is out there that you all think co-ops would have a good shot at qualifying for?
I think it's just fair to say it's billions of dollars, Scott. If co-ops are curious which programs we think our members are interested in, those are all on the infrastructure hub. There's, I would say, give or take, and maybe 20 or so programs that we think that our co-ops will actually care about and want to go after, that are their priorities.
Great. So in your capacity right now, you're trying to get co-ops to get their applications in and to figure out which of these programs they want to go after funding for. What are some of the things that you're hearing from the co-ops that you're talking to where they're saying, I don't know if we can do this. I don't think this is within our wheelhouse. We don't have the manpower. Are there things that are inhibiting co-ops from actually going ahead and doing this?
Yeah, there definitely are. It's a new world, right? In federal funding, right? That's a whole new topic area for cooperatives. There's a lot of jargon and a lot of lexicon and a lot of rules that are required. So I think that just by itself, picking up pretty much a whole new topic area is going to be a barrier for cooperatives to apply. These applications, as I had mentioned earlier, are small research projects. So for a co-op that is limited resources and just worrying about keeping the lights on, writing a research paper in their spare time, if they have any, is going to be a barrier, which is why NRECA saw that as a problem or a challenge, maybe not a problem, a challenge. And that's why we have the grant writer portal, right? Where we will matchmake co-ops with grant writers who are limited resources, are constrained, or just need some help. We'll help matchmake them with a grant writer that they can work with to focus on their actual day job, which is keeping the lights on while still going after that money. So one of the barriers, I think, is knowing how to write the application. And again, if you've never done this before, it's really hard to get started. Like, there's not a lot of templates out there about how to do this. And so that's kind of one of the things that NRECA has been working on, is how do we create templates? How do we create resources for cooperatives that have never done federal research or gone after federal funding? How do we make it easier? How do we reduce those barriers? And so I would argue every resource on the hub is with that theme in mind.
Lauren, you've talked about this as a sort of an onerous process. There's no way to sugarcoat it. It's not easy. But You have mentioned a couple of things that are on coop.com. You talked about the Infrastructure Resource Hub, talked about the portal for finding people to help you write grants. Talk about some of the other stuff that's available to co-ops, because I think the main thing they're going to want to hear out of this is, yeah, we know it's hard, but we know we also have somebody in our corner at NRECA to help out.
Yeah, I think the next resource that I would want to steer our members towards is the guidebook, the Infrastructure Bill Funding Opportunities Guidebook. It's digital. It's on our Infrastructure Hub. That is a great place to say, I don't know where to start. You want to start somewhere? I would start by reading that guidebook, because that guidebook is going to give you some basic information, some small vocabulary lesson, and I apologize for that, but there was a lot of acronyms in federal funding, so putting those acronyms out there for our members is very important. What's also a really great resource is Dr. Stewart's 30-minute webinars every month. She is a wealth of information when it comes to federal funding, and listening to those 30 minutes is going to keep you up to date with what is going on in infrastructure. If the only thing you can get to in a month on infrastructure is listening to those webinars, you're going to get a lot of information about what is coming down the pipe.
And that Dr. Stewart, that's Emma Stewart. She's NRECA's chief scientist.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, so all of this money is getting dispersed, over the next 5 years, as you said. What does this sort of lead into? Where is this all going?
Yeah, that's a really great question. We've been hurrying up and waiting a lot. And now the wait is over. We are expecting that 3 of our major programs that we think our members will be the most interested in will be dropping either this fall, winter, or early next year. And so I just want to give everyone just to prepare themselves and kind of circle the calendar on these 3 things. The 3 programs that we think will be coming out, in the next 6 months, and these are the ones that we do think our members will care about, is the first one is the energy improvements for rural and remote areas. It's $1 billion for communities that are less than 10,000 folks or less. They explain what they mean by how you can, slice and dice your service territory to account for 10,000 folks. But that one is ERA for short. We think that one will be coming out here pretty soon. So if the co-ops are interested, this is the time to curate their project plans. The next one that we think and we know is coming out is the Rural and Municipal Utility Advanced Cybersecurity Grant and Technical Assistance. That's a mouthful. We call it RMUC for short. And so if a co-op is interested in funding cybersecurity, this program is made for only rural electric cooperatives, municipal utilities, and small investor-owned utilities. So this is the best place for co-ops who want to invest in their cybersecurity posture, continuing to strengthen it, to apply for funding there, because there's $250 million for that program. And that is a great place for co-ops to get some of that much needed resources for cybersecurity. And then the one that we know is for sure coming out probably here pretty soon is the Grid Resilience and Innovation Partnership, or GRIP for short. GRIP has 3 topic areas. Topic area 1, think of it as the poles and wires area, which is the federal portion of poles and wires. Topic 2 is going to be those smart grid and data analytics tools for drones, for DERMS, for sensors, for distribution automation where it makes sense. And then the third topic area, which we are not eligible for, is for additional R&D in this space. And so those 3 programs are coming out here probably pretty soon. And those are the ones that we think our members really should be aware of, be ready to jump on, and be thinking about which one of their projects ideas could fit into that.
This is a fascinating time. I wonder if you could just sort of give us a sense of, there have been big federal funding programs before, but this one is not only gigantic in terms of the dollar amount, but in terms of the many different areas that it's trying to shape, the economy and the landscape on. What would you say the end game for this is? Why is it so important that co-ops go for this funding now? Is this as transformative as it seems?
I think so. I think that this is the biggest investment in our infrastructure in my lifetime, and probably a lot of folks' lifetime. And, I think that co-ops, they're small, but they're mighty, I like to say. And sometimes, some extra resources are never a bad thing. And so I think for co-ops who want to go after this money and who think it makes sense for their cooperative, there is a huge opportunity space to fund some of those projects that were nice to have, but maybe not necessary or critical at that point in time. I think that this could really add a level of resources that our co-ops just have never seen.
For a generation, yeah. Well, Lauren, your energy is infectious on this. I'm so glad you came on and sort of gave us this lowdown. And good luck going forward. I know you got a busy couple of years ahead of you.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate you.
Let's pause here for a word from our sponsor. And when we come back, we'll talk to a co-op leader who has some good advice for fellow grant applicants.
NRECA's Along Those Lines podcast is supported by CTC Global Corporation, who is committed to helping America's electric co-ops build a modern grid using high-performance and energy-efficient bare overhead conductors. CTC Global's ACCC conductor can not only double the capacity of existing lines using existing structures, its improved efficiency reduces line losses associated with CO2 emissions to help the environment and reduce utility and consumer costs. The ACCC conductor has been proven at well over 1,000 projects in more than 60 countries.
I'm Ryan Hall from the Montana Electric Cooperatives Association. You're listening to Along Those Lines.
Welcome back. Victoria Electric Cooperative has already started applying for broadband funding from programs within the federal infrastructure law. To talk about that process, we have Jessica Gray. She's Victoria's Chief Financial Officer and the person who's been spearheading the co-op's grant writing efforts. Jessica, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Scott. Thank you. We're happy to be here.
Okay, so Victoria EC has applied or is in the process of applying for federal infrastructure grants. Can you give us a sense which programs you're looking into getting funding from?
Sure. So the first one we're really looking at is the IIJA BEAD program, which is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment Grant. So there's about $42.5 billion in federal funding that'll be administered by the states. So a lot of the states are working towards or have already set up their application and grant process. So we're waiting for Texas to finalize those. We are also working with our county to hopefully get some of the ARPA funds, which was the American Rescue Plan Act, the Capital Projects Fund that was allocated money for broadband there as well. And then we also have the USDA Community Connect grant on our radar, which hopefully will have another opening next year. So there's a lot of money floating out there.
Yeah, a lot of acronyms too.
Yes.
And have you all at Victoria been through this federal grant process before? I think most co-ops are sort of familiar with the RUS loan program, but these federal grants are sort of a different animal altogether. Is this something you're relatively familiar with, or is it all new?
We are still in the early stages of applying for these grants. A lot of them are just opening or just the kind of preliminary drafts of the applications and guidance coming out. But we have worked with our school districts to submit some E-rate fundings. So that's administered by the Universal Services Administrative Fund. So kind of the same platform, just a different application. You still have to go through the RFP and kind of prove your experience and history with the project. We have also worked through several FEMA grants through Hurricane Harvey and the Hazard Mitigation Grant Programs. So again, kind of just reading the requirements and making sure you're aligning your application accordingly. And then we have also worked with our school districts to obtain funding through the Emergency Connectivity Fund, and that was to build high-speed broadband access to students and staff throughout the district, especially during the pandemic when they were doing all the remote learning, just trying to close that homework gap.
We talked to Lauren Khair earlier. She was quite honest about how daunting this process of applying for federal grants can be. But she was also very optimistic about, the ability of co-ops to sort of rise to the challenge. Victoria is not a huge co-op. You have about 24,000 meters, somewhere around 80 employees, I think you said. So it's probably fair to assume that you don't have a full-time grant writer on staff and that this process sort of necessarily means extra work for some folks. Would that be a correct assessment?
Yes, that's absolutely true. And that's, I would say, one of the biggest hurdles to overcome is just reading through all the notice of funding announcements and requirements and guidelines and just kind of wrapping your head around what is required and what's going to be needed, the time constraints, and again, within the business itself, who has the time, what different departments you're going to be pulling in. So we will be utilizing internal resources, but we are actually working with NRECA's grant writing partner to help match us up with a grant writing firm. So we will definitely be pursuing that just due to the sheer volume of information that's required for a lot of these grants.
That's great. I wonder if you could sort of walk us through the decision-making process that you all went through before you even decided to go for this grant. Is it something that you all come together and sort of talked about and said, yeah, I think we should do this or we can do this? Tell us sort of what the process was to get you to the point where you were like, okay, let's go for this.
Yes, absolutely. So kind of our core broadband team will get together. We keep a running spreadsheet of the grants that are available as we find them, what the requirements are for each grant, and then also the deadlines, just to see if we have enough time to be able to even pull that grant together. So one of the first things we really look at is the notice of funding opportunity, just to make sure that grant aligns with our mission and goals of providing broadband service to those underserved and unserved areas. And then also, like you had mentioned, we look through the requirements of the grant just to make sure that areas that we would be eligible to apply for are worth the work that the grant entails. So not only on the front end, but a lot of them also have a lot of after grant reporting for multiple years once the grant is awarded. We really look at the eligibility requirements just to make sure that the cooperative is an eligible recipient, because a lot of them will be awarded to the state first, like the BEAD program. So you would then be applying to the state versus through the national infrastructure that's guiding the loan. And then we also really look at the cost sharing requirements, because many of the grants require a cost match, usually 25 or more % of the grant. You have to provide matching funds as well.
Wow, yeah, I don't know if a lot of co-ops know that. That's a really good point. And one of the things that we were talking to Lauren about, and you've gotten into this a little bit with the process of doing the application, can you walk us a little bit through the steps that you took and maybe a little bit of the time it has taken you all to go from deciding to go after this grant to the time that you hit send on the application?
Yeah, so like I said, we're still in the very early stages applying for these grants, waiting for them to open the full application. But in talking with different grant writers and consultants, they suggest 6 to 8 weeks in advance of submission to be able to prepare, a well-organized, complete application. And that gives you enough time to review all the documentation and pull everything together. So you're looking at several months of investment in each grant opportunity.
Yeah, and that is daunting, but it's important to be sort of upfront and honest about the time commitment that you're looking at. But I think what you said it earlier, you have to weigh the balance of whether the funding is sufficient enough to make it worth the effort. And a lot of these grants, it seems to be the case that it is. Is there any advice that you could give to co-ops, either pitfalls to avoid, shortcuts that will help you to get through the process a little easier, anything that in your experience up until now that would help co-ops take on what you've taken on?
I would say start early, because those deadlines come up quickly. You say 2 to 3 months out, but those 2 to 3 months are here and gone before you realize it. And there's also just a lot of documentation you can start gathering that's pretty basic across all the grants, resumes of your key employees, your history, kind of your engagement in the community, and just kind of what your service area looks like. So just getting a head start and preparing that document, so whenever the notice of funding opportunity does come out, you have kind of the base platform ready to go and just tailor them accordingly. A couple of other things we have noticed along the way is that it's important to enroll in the Affordable Connectivity Program, as many of the grants do require a low-cost option. So that just allows the subscriber to get a $30 bill credit as long as they meet the requirements of that program. And then we have also noticed a lot of the grants are really focused on the unserved or underserved areas of the state or the nation. So having a diversity, equity, and inclusion plan is really something we're focused on and trying to get put into place, so we have that available as well.
Before I let you go, Jessica, I know Victoria has sort of committed the resources to doing these grants in the past. You're putting a lot of effort into it now. Can you sort of philosophically talk about why it's important to utilize these funds in the way that they're intended, and why co-ops are particularly good at not only qualifying for these grants, but actually putting them into practice the way they were meant to be done?
Yeah, sure. Co-ops are here for our community. The concern for community is one of our core cooperative principles. So we already have a lot of that engagement within the community and the schools and the different organizations that our community serves. So to be able to align that and partner with your counties or your state officials, having those relationships in place, which a lot of cooperatives already do, really helps plead our case and put our mission out there. We already have our plans in place. We are well established and we are local. If you call us, you're going to get a person, so we're really trying to emphasize that those funds go to cooperatives or local companies that are going to be there long term and are not just getting the money to throw out a build and just see what happens in the long term. And there's $110 billion that has been identified that cooperatives could use. And it's not just broadband. There's grid modernization, resiliency, EVs, cybersecurity. So it really gives us the opportunity to just help our membership out in many aspects that we are able to serve them in.
I mean, it sounds like you guys are doing all the right things. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing some of your lessons learned so far. And best of luck to Victoria with your applications and then actually using that funding.
Yes, thank you. We appreciate it.
And thanks to you, our listeners, and to our sponsor, CTC Global. For more on this and other podcasts, visit us at electric.coop. Until next time, for Along Those Lines, I'm Scott Hoffman.
Hi, I'm Kelly Crawford from Blue Ridge Mountain EMC in Young Harris, Georgia. Thanks for listening to Along Those Lines. Subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcast app.